Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing my December wrap-up, so the conclusion to my 2020 reading. And in December I had a pretty chill reading month. I decided that, I wanted to keep reading books, but I didn't want to push myself the last month. I didn't want to try and race and see how many books I could finish and squeeze in at the end. And I had that philosophy for most of the month, and then right at the end I was like, no wait, I want to finish one more book. So I did kind of squeeze one more right at the end. But for most of the month I was being pretty laid back about what I was reading, and I only finished 4 books, but I pretty much enjoyed all of them, and I had one that was 5 stars, which I really loved. So let's just get started, and we're going to start with the 5-star book because that was the first one that I read that month, which is A Dance with Fate by Juliet Marillier. I feel like it's not a huge surprise that this one got 5 stars because I love Juliet Marillier, but this is the second book in the Warrior Bards trilogy, and this came out towards the end of 2020, and I really wanted to finish this in 2020, so I'm really glad that I got to it in December. So this is adult historical fantasy that is set in early medieval Ireland. It's also set in the same world as her Seven Waters series and Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy, and in this we're following 3 young warriors who in the first book were all vying for positions at Swan Island, which is this place where they train elite warriors. And so these 3 young warriors were vying for their spots, and then in the first book they are sent on a mission together. And in this second book we are following the same 3 young warriors. One of them is kind of off on his own doing his own thing, and then 2 of them are still on Swan Island. And at the beginning of this story, one of the warriors of Swan Island has a training accident in a sparring match with Livan, and he gets a head injury that makes him go blind, and so he is sent back to his family home, and Livan is sent with him as a bond servant for 1 year because she was involved in the training accident. But he has a very difficult past with his family and at his family home, and he really does not want to go back there. And when the 2 of them get to his family home, they discover that things might be more complicated there than he thought because he hasn't been back in a very long time. And there may also be some secrets that are being kept. And so they kind of have to start to unravel what has been going on. And I really loved this. I definitely enjoyed the first book in the trilogy, but this one was even better. I thought this one was so good. I was just drawn in right away and immediately invested in the story. I really loved the characters. There's the same characters from the first book, but I feel like in this one I felt so much more connected to the characters. One of the main characters, his whole storyline is really about kind of confronting his past and inner demons and past traumas and things. And I always really love those kind of character storylines and character arcs that have characters really dealing with their internal experiences. I think I appreciated Livan's character so much more in this one. She's a really good friend, and I don't know, I feel like her character really came to life in this one, and I just appreciated her so much more. There is a romance in this that is Juliet Marillier can write really good slow burn romances, and this has a rivals to friends to lovers romance over the course of this series, and I love it. I also thought the pacing was really good in this one. All of Juliet Marillier's books are very slow-paced books, and this is no exception, but I thought the pacing was just really consistent, and it really kept me reading. There weren't any parts that dragged. I just wanted to keep reading this book. And reading this really made me realize how I've felt very neutral towards so much of my other reading this year because I just felt so differently about this book than I felt about so many of the other books that I read this year, because I just didn't want to put this one down. I was enjoying it so much. I loved being in this world. I loved being with these characters. I wanted to know what happened. And as I said, I loved the pacing of it. Everything about this was just drawing me in. The only thing that I didn't love about this was Brock's perspective, because I just wasn't as invested in his character and what was going on in his storyline, but his character and storyline were definitely important to the overall story of the book and the series as a whole. So like, I don't begrudge his storyline being in the book. I just was like a little less interested in what he was doing in comparison to the other two perspectives that we had on this. But I absolutely loved this. I gave this 5 stars. Then the next book that I read was The Halfdrowned King by Linnea Hartsoeker. This is historical fiction set in Norway. It is following Vikings. There are a few perspectives that we're following, but the two main perspectives are a brother and sister. At the beginning of the story, the brother has been off on raiding trips and is on his way home from a raid when somebody tries to kill him and dump him in the ocean and is left for dead. But he does survive and he makes his way back home. And his sister, meanwhile, is at home waiting for him to return when she hears that he has died, and she decides that she needs to take her life into her own hands because her brother was the one who was going to choose a husband for her, and if he is gone, then that responsibility goes to her stepfather, who she has a very bad relationship with and she doesn't trust to choose a husband for her. So she starts to kind of plan as to what she's going to do to make her life the best it can be in her situation. And to do that, she might end up having to marry her brother's nemesis in order to protect herself. And this book, I didn't really know how I felt about it as I was reading it. It was one that as I was reading, I was kind of like, I feel like not that much is happening and it's kind of boring, but also I'm kind of enjoying it. So, but I don't know why. Like, I couldn't point to any particular thing that made me like it. So I did enjoy this, but I don't really know why. And I didn't like love it. I was just kind of like, yeah, we'll keep reading this. I did find that the brother's perspective was kind of frustrating. I liked the sister's perspective a lot more. I think part of that is because the brother is he feels like a kind of passive character, even though in this, society, he has more agency as a man. He was just kind of more passive. He seemed a little more aimless and just stuff sort of happened to him. And I also think his perspective was more annoying because he spent a lot more time with other warriors, and there was just so much posturing that was absolutely ridiculous. Like, I don't doubt that it's historically accurate, the level of posturing and like duels and people like insulting each other's honor and whatever, but that doesn't make it less annoying. Like, it just got so annoying because there was so much posturing and so many people being like, you've insulted my honor, now we have to duel so I can kill you. And I'm like, so many of these people died for no reason because somebody said like a very mild insult to them. And he just, since he was around so many more like warriors and lords and kings and whatever, there was just so much more of that, and it got really annoying. In the sister's perspective, she also had to deal with a little bit of that, but there was a lot less because she was more like off on her own. I think she was also more around just like common people and less like warriors and lords and people who were getting all like up in arms about their honor. And she also was just around fewer people at a time, so like there wasn't as much like need for this kind of posturing for their reputation among these large groups of people. Just her story just didn't involve as much of that. And then I also just think her character was more interesting because she was a more active character. She actually had like goals in mind, and she was taking charge and making decisions, and I don't know, like actually taking more risks and just like actively doing things, even though she was more constrained in her life circumstance. So I just thought her perspective was much more interesting. Her perspective also had a romance in it, which I ended up enjoying. I had some mixed feelings about the romance, but overall I liked it. So that did also make her perspective more interesting. So overall, I did enjoy this, but I kind of ended it with some mixed feelings about it. And I'm not sure at this point whether I'm going to continue this series or not. yeah, just because I have some very mixed feelings about it. So I don't know if anyone's read this series, let me know if you feel like the series is worth continuing or not, because I'm open to continuing it, but I'm not sure if I'm really motivated to read the next few books, because I think there are 3 books in the trilogy. But I gave this one 3.5 stars. And then the last 2 books that I read in December were the final 2 books in the An Ember in the Ashes series by Sabaa Tahir. So that is A Reaper at the Gates and A Sky Beyond the Storm. And I listened to both of these as audiobooks. And A Reaper at the Gates I didn't enjoy as much as the first 2 books. I do feel like I may have forgotten some stuff since reading the first 2 books, although it's only been a couple of months since I read those, so I don't feel like I've forgotten that much, but for some reason starting A Reaper at the Gates, I felt a little bit lost. I also just felt like this book wasn't as interesting as the first 2. It didn't have the same sense of urgency that the first 2 books had. I felt like the first 2/3 of the book, I was just not that engaged in it, and then in the last third of the book, it started to get really good, and I really enjoyed that last third, but for a large portion of it, I just wasn't that engaged in it. I think part of that is because most of the main characters, like, we're following 3 main perspectives, and they aren't really together during most of the book. They're kind of each off doing their own thing. And I think that's part of what made this also feel like a bridge book, because very often my issue with bridge books, the ones that just kind of connect other books in the series, is because the individual characters are usually separated from each other, and they each have to kind of accomplish their own storyline, do their own thing, which may be important to the overall story and be necessary to it, but it's just not as interesting, because usually the most interesting parts to me are when those characters are able to interact. And I just think it's something that happens with a lot of second books, or since this is, you know, a 4-book series, this is the 3rd book, but those ones that are kind of in the middle and sort of bridging other things together, they tend to kind of disperse their characters, and I just think it makes the story less interesting, less engaging. So yeah, that was kind of how I felt about Reaper at the Gates. I gave that one 3.5 stars, and then I read A Sky Beyond the Storm, which is the one that I kind of decided to squeeze in right at the end. I originally hadn't been planning to read it this month, and then I was like, you know what, we're just gonna finish this whole series this year and we're gonna squeeze it in at the end. And I ended up liking A Sky Beyond the Storm a lot more, and I think a lot of that is because they all came back together and those characters were, you know, interacting again, and we got to see those like relationships and dynamics and how things are developing or falling apart or what have you. Now, in this last book, I kind of wish that I had had a physical copy to read along with the audiobook that I was listening to, because there are a lot of prophecies that are being thrown out there during this book, and I found it really hard to kind of keep track of all of the prophecies that were going on and to really understand what they were saying. And I just wish that I had had a physical copy so that I could have like read the prophecies a couple of times to really like understand what they were saying. So that's one thing that I just wish that I'd had a physical copy so that I could have kept track of the prophecies a little bit better. I did find in this one that sometimes Laia was making decisions that didn't make sense to me, so that was kind of frustrating. Overall, I think that, you know, what she was doing did make sense, and I could like follow her logic of why she was doing what she was doing, but once in a while there was something that I was like, why? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? There were definitely a lot of deaths in this final book, and there were some deaths that I was like very surprised by, and surprised that, I don't know, that she would kill off that character, so that was interesting. And yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about the way that it ended. Like overall, the like overall conclusion of it I liked, but there were some details about how they got there and how they accomplished what they accomplished at the end, and how they defeated certain characters that I I didn't love, although I also feel like maybe I, again, wish I had had a physical copy to really understand exactly what had happened, because there were some parts that I felt went by really fast, and I did like re-listen to a couple of the scenes just to make sure I understood like what was happening, but it would have helped to have been able to read it as well. Overall, I really like the audiobooks for this series, and if I reread this series, I probably will read it as audiobooks. I just feel like there were a couple of details that I missed because I wasn't physically reading the book. But overall, I found it a pretty satisfying conclusion to the series, and I give this one 4 stars, and it was a pretty good way to end the month and end the year. So that is all for my December wrap up. Those are all of the 4 books that I read in December. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!